Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. It's called a ceasefire, but importantly, the war continues. The American-Israeli war of choice has destabilized the global economy and strengthened Iran. Trump warns time is running out, and he's right, for his presidency and failed strategy. Cross-talking the so-called ceasefire, I'm joined by my guest, Mohamed Marandi in Tehran. He is a professor at the University of Tehran. In Doha, we have Luciano Zaccara. He is a political analyst. And in Singapore, we cross to Dr. Alatas. He is a professor at the National University of Singapore. All right, gentlemen, cross-talk rules in effect. That means you can jump anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Mohamed, in Tehran, it's good to see you. Good to see you in good health. I see you all over the place. That must mean you're making a huge difference, and we're all very thankful. I'm titling this program Ceasefire Limbo, and I'm not really happy with that title because it's not really a ceasefire, and if there's anything in limbo, it's Donald Trump's brain. How do you react to my title?
Well, it's just like the war itself, and you're absolutely correct. From the very start, this was an unprovoked war, and if you watch Western media, especially during the war, you'd think Iran started it. And now this ceasefire is not really a ceasefire. The United States is acting offensively. It's an act of war directed against Iranians. They fired on ships, they board ships, they hijack ships, and they're violating the so-called ceasefire because Iran and the United States had an agreement. After the Israeli regime finally, after 10 days of resistance, was forced to stop slaughtering women and children in Lebanon, the Iranians went and began to implement their side of the bargain, allowing more ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. But then the United States, which had imposed a siege on ports after the ceasefire agreement, decided to continue to impose that policy, and as a result, Iran reversed its decision. So the United States is violating the ceasefire with acts of war, and the world economy is suffering, and there's no end in sight.
Yeah, well, but there is an end eventually here. Let's go to our guests in Doha. Luciano, it seems to me, I ask this question often about conflicts. Who's got the clocks and who's got the time? Donald Trump is saying time is running out, but I think time is running out for him. This is a disastrous war. It never should have been started in the first place. And it's a war the United States and Israel started, but can't really find a way out, though the Israelis have no problem with the Americans staying in for a forever war. So who's got the clocks and who's got the time?
I think that the time now, again, is on the Iranian side. I think that this war was started without a strategy, without a clear objective from the United States, because they were dragged into a war that it was mainly desired and wished by Israel. Therefore, if you have no objective and no clear strategy, you don't know when to end this war and when you can decide that the war is over. And I think that the time is running out for Trump, because the one that is going to pay the political price for starting this war with his own people, with his own MAGA movement, within his own party, is Trump. More time pass, and Trump is moving from threats that they're going to annihilate the whole Iranian civilization, obliterate the whole country, and the following day extending a ceasefire without any expiration date. It's giving you an idea that the time is running for him, that he needs to get an exit as soon as possible, but he doesn't know exactly how to get it, because at the end of the day, he returned the initiative to Iran. So the United States started the war, but the United States gave Iran a card that they didn't have before. Iran threatened to use the Strait of Hormuz during 40 years, and they never used it. And they use it once the United States attacked them. So Iran is using a very efficiently the
Well,
control of the Strait
and
of Hormuz, and the
there's
United States couldn't do anything.
and there's no indication that status of the strait is going to change ever. And now it is a permanent status. Professor Alatas in Singapore, I'm very confused right here because why should Iran honor a ceasefire that the United States is violating? I mean, this is the limbo part of all of this here. And Iran is basically, and the world is basically telling the United States, you don't hold all of the cards, and actually you are running out of time because the globe is slowly but surely, and very quickly soon, be turning against the United States and Israel for the global economic situation that is going to be dire for many in a matter of weeks. Go ahead in Singapore.
Yes, I agree. In fact, with reference to the title of this show, Ceasefire, Limbo, I think an alternative could be neo-colonialism interrupted, because I think this is exactly what the situation is. The war against Iran, ostensibly because Iran is a threat to world order, Iran promotes terrorism, Iran is on the brink of developing nuclear weapons, but these are manifest reasons. They're not the latent, they're not the real reasons. And I think the real reason is that Iran is one of the very few states in the world, and the only state in the region, which is decidedly anti-imperialist. It is anti-Israeli expansionism. It is anti-presence of US bases in the region. It is also an important participant in the BRICS movement, which is an anti-neo-colonial movement. So I think this is really the problem with the West for Iran. It's the problem that the proxies of the West in the Middle East as well. So the war was part of this move to consolidate neocolonialism, and it was a miscalculation. It has failed, and now you have a brief and hopefully a long-term interruption of neocolonialism.
Yeah, let's go back to Tehran. Mohammed, Trump is saying that he's waiting for a proposal from Iran, but the very basis of this so-called ceasefire started on the Trump administration accepting the so-called 10 points from Iran. I mean, it's very confusing trying to keep up with the changing storyline here. There is a proposal out there. It's 10 points. I think I can name all 10 of them right from memory, okay, because they're all very rational and what Iran should eventually get. What is the West not getting here? Mohammed?
Well, I think what your previous guest said is part of the response, and that is that the empire does not accept, or the neo-colonial empire does not accept rational and fair proposals, even though Trump did formally accept it initially. When the war began, he demanded unconditional surrender, just like at the beginning of the 12-day war last year. And then the Iranians ignored him. And after 30-some days, he put forward his 15-point plan, which Iran rejected out of hand because it violated Iran's sovereignty. And then a few days later, Iran gave its own 10-day plan, which was rational and fair. And Trump, out of desperation, accepted it. He said he accepted that it would be the framework for the discussion. But then, of course, as soon as the discussions began, he ignored the 10-point plan and again began behaving like an empire. He wanted to gain what he at the negotiating table, what he could not get on the battlefield. And obviously, Iran is not going to accept that. So back then, he was killing Iranians, killing children, lots of children, as we saw on the first day of the war, 168 to be precise, in the first wave of attacks, mostly girls. Now he's trying to strangle Iranians and to prevent them from importing food, prevent them from importing supplies for factories that produce medicine, and so on. And most probably within the next few days, I think, when he sees that Iran will still not submit, he will initiate another round of violent aggression, which won't work either. For Iran, this is a struggle for survival.
Yep.
And for the United States, this is a war of choice that's being done on behalf of Netanyahu and Zionism. As Joe Kent himself, a Trump, someone who was appointed by Trump in his resignation letter, said very explicitly.
Let's go back to our guest in Doha. What has this war of choice achieved for the United States and Israel? I keep searching my mind. I can't think of one thing.
What the war achieved for Israel, honestly, I don't think...
Certainly Israel won in the sense that it got Trump to go into this senseless war. Keep going.
No, I mean, if we compare the situation before and after 28th of February, we have to say that this is the most irrational war fought or started in the last 10 or 15 years in the whole region. With, as I said before, with objectives that were not clear, with objectives that or justifications that they were fabricated at last minute, because Rubio justified the same day of the attacks on 28th of February, that Iran was 2 weeks away from getting a nuclear bomb, and that the missiles they were about to reach the United States, two things that they were totally wrong and totally a lie to justify a war that was decided.
All right, gentlemen, I have to jump in. We have to go to a hard break, and after that hard break, we'll continue our discussion on the so-called ceasefire. Stay with our team. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the so-called ceasefire. Okay, let's go back to Singapore. Professor Ilatas, it hasn't been verbalized by Trump, but if you look through his reams and reams of commentary, often very contradictory, and some of it just outside of reality. But he really is kind of wanting to return to the status quo ante when the strait was open, okay? But there's no going back, and that door has been closed forever. And Professor Morandi has been on this program many times. I would say that's for the region as well. These monarchies that, I call them brands, they're forever changed. Maybe not all of them will actually survive, because if Trump does commit to another round of kinetic action, it's not going to achieve anything that he hasn't been able to achieve, which has been nothing. And it will be the global South that will scream and change the global order forever. This decline of the neoliberal order is rapid, and we're seeing it right in front of our eyes. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think there are a number of lessons that we have learned, from these events. The attack of U.S. and Israel against Iran has revealed the fact that some of the Gulf Arab states had been compromising their sovereignty by having U.S. bases.
That's right.
They miscalculated. They didn't understand. They thought that they would be protected by the U.S. and they were not. Hopefully, they will realize that they need to be part of a new order, an order in which all the countries in the region, Turkey, the Arab states, Iran, take matters into their own hands. The region is in charge, should be in charge of its own destiny. If there are any good lessons to come out of all of this, it should be that. And I think the other issue is the question of Iran violating international law by controlling the Straits of Hormuz. I think this point has been taken for granted, unfortunately. I think what is clear is that the U.S. and Israel violated international law by attacking Iran, and the fact that although there is the law of the seas, the fact is, in a war situation where U.S. Navy is in the Strait of Hormuz and attacking Iran, and where across the strait in the Gulf states you have they are launching pads for attacks against Iran. This is a wartime situation, and I think one could argue, an international lawyer could argue that it was within Iran's rights. It was legitimate for Iran to take control of the Strait of Hormuz under these wartime, conditions. Unfortunately, a lot of the Western media and even the rest of the international media does not take these issues into account, and Iran is, unfortunately, painted, as a force that is forever violating the law. Even those who criticize the war, they criticize the war for not having objectives. For the Europeans criticize the Americans for not having consulted them. They don't seem to be against the war in principle. They don't seem to understand the point of view of Iran.
Yeah, well, Mohammed, I mean, who really cares what the Europeans have to say on international law or anything remotely close to it? They watched a genocide and didn't lift a finger. So talking about international law, Kaya Kallas, just as a walking joke, okay, a symbol of Western hypocrisy. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Yes, the war itself was a crime against humanity, and it was unprovoked, and it caused enormous damage. And right now, a siege is imposed on Iranian ports to prevent food and supplies from coming into the country. And again, the Europeans and Western countries and their proxies will do nothing and say nothing. And the reason why Iran was holding back many of the ships in the Persian Gulf, because the Strait of Hormuz was never closed until the Americans imposed this siege. The reason why Iran was holding back those ships, they were the ships that belonged to countries that were at war with Iran. Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, they were engaged in war. These countries allowed the United States to use their airspace, their air bases, not just American bases, but their own bases also. And their territory outside the U.S. bases were used to launch HIMARS missiles and other missile systems. And so they've been a part of this war. They thought that they could have their cake and eat it too. They thought that they could sit back and say, well, we're neutral, while their territory was being used to slaughter little children. But that's not going to happen. And not only is Iran's Iran never even planned to take the control of the Strait of Hormuz, but not only is it legal, Iran has an obligation for its own future security to make sure that the Persian Gulf is no longer used as a platform to slaughter Iranians, but also those countries who took part in this war are going to have to pay reparations. They have to pay to those families of those children who they murdered. They helped the Americans murder them. And of course, the Israeli regime, the United States, these countries, they're all a part of a broader coalition. And in future, Iran is not going to allow that to happen. So I think if you look across the global majority, and even in many parts of the West, you see support for Iran growing, and that the overwhelming majority of people across the world, from what I've heard and from what I've read and from my anecdotal experience, is siding with Iran. So no one really, in Tehran, no one really cares what the Washington Post says. The Washington Post just a few days ago, when we were in Islamabad, called for the murder of the Iranian delegation, the negotiators. So where's international law when the Washington Post is calling for this mass slaughter of Iranian diplomats?
Yeah, let's go back to our guests in Doha. I mean, that's Professor Marandi brought up a really good point. I mean, the problem is that the United States and Israel do not see the Islamic Republic of Iran as a legitimate partner. That's the problem right here, okay? That's why, because if you don't recognize them as being legitimate, then they're a target to be killed, okay? And if I were, giving out advice here, I would say to the government of Iran, just wait for Trump to to beg to come back to the table with concrete proposals and leave the two Israeli assets out of the meeting because they're just minders for Netanyahu. I mean, that's even mentioned in mainstream media now. It's not like, verboten to say it. Go ahead in Doha.
It is true. I mean, United States does not recognize Iran as interlocutor. I mean, the Islamic Republic, and this has been since the very beginning. You have to remember the different campaigns that the United States government, different governments, they have been launching for regime change inside Iran. The last one, very important, was during the first presidency of Trump, that there were billions of dollars dedicated to promote regime change, contributing with the opposition groups in the United States, supporting the heir of the Shah in Los Angeles. How you can make a deal, how can you reach an agreement with a political institution that you don't believe and you don't consider that is legitimate? Of course, it's very difficult. And this has been the trend since the beginning of the war. I mean, Trump has been arguing that he needed to promote the regime change, and to some extent he said that he already did, that this regime is different than the previous one, that they are dealing with more intelligent and reasonable people, without really noticing that nothing changed that much. Even the surname of the leader is the same. So it's difficult to believe what is the final objective, what is the end game of the United States in terms of, if you need to reach an agreement on the nuclear file, you have to do it with the current government. If you need to reach an agreement with someone to deal on the security of the Persian Gulf, you need to deal with the government that is already in place in Iran, and so far it doesn't look like it's going to change. So the United States is in the midst of a very complicated situation in which they claim that they want to overthrow, destroy, obliterate a political regime that they need in order to reach an agreement. And in order to reach an agreement that most probably, if this is continuing and we have further negotiations in Islamabad to discuss the nuclear file, it will be very similar to what it was signed in 2015, which was something that he decided that he didn't like.
Exactly. That's where I wanted to go. Professor Alatas, I mean, this is the same president that tore up the JCPOA, okay? I mean, who's the reliable negotiator here?
Okay, I want to say something in that regard. All of this tells us that there's a problem with the quality of the American side.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the intellectual quality. And it reminds me of the colonial period in the 19th century, in the early 20th century. It was very well known that the colonial officers assigned to the colonies were of inferior quality to their counterparts who remained in the home country. Colonial officers, colonial scholars in the 19th century based in Malaya, in Indonesia, and so on, were actually of inferior quality. They sent those of inferior quality to us, to govern us. And we see that now in America. You look at the cabinet, you look at the US cabinet compared to the Iranian cabinet. You look at the qualifications, you look at how they speak. They are, Marco Rubio, for example, not very intelligent, but he is yearning for the days of colonialism. When he spoke at the Munich Security Conference in February, he was talking about how we should return to those glory days. Pete Hegseth he's Islamophobic. That may be the best thing you can say about him. There are other terrible qualities that he has.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to have, we're rapidly running out of time. I will just make the comment in reference to what we just heard, is that from what I can see, looking at the ministers of Iran, all of them write many, many books. I have to wonder if the American cabinet can even read books. On that note, gentlemen, fascinating discussion. I want to thank my guests in Tehran, Doha, and in Singapore. And of course, I want to thank our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. Remember, crosstalk rules.